Some prisons weren't built to hold criminals, they were built to break souls. From islands swarming with sharks to torture chambers hidden in plain sight, history is filled with places so horrific, their names still send shivers down our spines. Prepare to face the darkness as we unveil the 10 most feared prisons throughout history. First up, we're sailing to Devil's Island off the coast of French Guiana. It wasn't a tropical paradise, it was hell on earth. The French sent their worst criminals there, along with political prisoners who'd ticked off the wrong people. Once you arrived, escape was impossible. Sharks patrolled the waters, and the jungle was filled with deadly creatures. The prisoners were left to rot in the heat and humidity, with disease running rampant. The guards were brutal, and the death rate was staggering. Out of 80,000 prisoners sent there, only a few thousand ever left alive. Devil's Island was a place of despair and brutality, a stain on history that even today, decades after its closure, sends shivers down the spine. Devil's Island might be a distant nightmare, but America had its own brand of inescapable hell. Just a stone's throw from the Golden Gate Bridge, Alcatraz Island looms over the icy waters of San Francisco Bay. They called it the Rock, and it was home to the worst of the worst. Al Capone, Machine Gun Kelly. If you were a big-time gangster, Alcatraz was your final destination. The cells were cold and damp, the rules were strict, and the guards had zero tolerance for trouble. But the worst part was the isolation. Surrounded by freezing water and treacherous currents, escape seemed impossible. There were a few brave souls who tried. They dug tunnels, made rafts out of raincoats. Some even vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers and legends. But officially, no one ever escaped the Rock. It was a prison designed to break men, to make them disappear from the world, forgotten and alone. Alcatraz might have been a grim reminder of America's past, but when it comes to isolation, Russia takes it to a whole new level. Out in the vastness of White Lake, there's an island that's home to a prison so brutal, it's known as the Alcatraz of Russia. Welcome to Petak Island Prison, where the punishment is silence and loneliness. Forget gang warfare or prison riots. At Petak Island, the real enemy is your own mind. The prisoners here spend almost all day locked in tiny dark cells with just 2 hours of exercise in a fenced-in yard. No talking, no human contact. It's like being buried alive. The guards are strict, the rules are harsh, and the punishments are swift and cruel. But the worst part? The endless silence. Surrounded by a cold lake with miles of empty land in every direction, there's no escape and no way to reach the outside world. It's a place designed to break people down, to turn them into shadows of their former selves. The mystery of ancient graves might leave you pondering the past, but let's shift gears to the horrors of more recent history, from Russia's frozen isolation to the heart of Paris, France, where a different kind of darkness lurks. La Santé Prison, opened in 1867, has a reputation that'll make even the toughest criminals shiver. It wasn't just the overcrowded cells or the disgusting conditions. La Santé was a breeding ground for violence, with gangs ruling the roost and riots erupting on a regular basis. Prisoners were divided based on race and social class, creating a powder keg of tension and resentment. Imagine being trapped in that hellhole, surrounded by enemies, with barely enough room to breathe, let alone sleep. Some inmates couldn't handle it, turning to suicide as their only escape. Others got more creative. In 2000, over 100 prisoners tried to break out in a massive, coordinated effort. Some made it over the walls, others didn't. Even with some renovations, La Santé's dark legacy remains. From the crumbling corridors of La Santé to a prison that earned its nickname for all the wrong reasons. If you think French prisons were harsh, brace yourself for Thailand's Bang Kwang Central Prison, aka the Bangkok Hilton. But there's no room service or fancy pool here. This place is all about punishment, not luxury. New arrivals are shackled for their first 3 months. a terrifying initiation into a world where overcrowding and filth are the norm. Forget decent food or medical care, basic survival's the only luxury here. The guards rule with an iron fist, and the inmates are trapped in a cycle of fear and despair. The worst part, the sense of hopelessness. Many of the prisoners are on death row, their fate hanging over them every day. It's a place where the future is a black abyss, and the present is a grim fight for survival. Bangkwang's reputation is so bad, it's attracted international attention and criticism. But despite calls for reform, it remains a symbol of the harshest side of justice. The past isn't always buried deep underground. Sometimes, the most haunting relics are still standing, their walls echoing with the screams of those who suffered within. Take the Chateau d'If, a fortress off the coast of France, made famous by the story of the Count of Monte Cristo. This wasn't some romantic island getaway, it was a prison, cold and unforgiving. The stone walls were thick, the sea surrounding it was filled with sharks, and the prisoners, well, they were the ones no one wanted back in society. Political enemies, religious outcasts, anyone who dared to defy the French king. Forget about escaping. This place was built to be inescapable. Prisoners were locked in damp cells, often chained to the walls. The only light came from tiny windows, and the sound of the waves was a constant reminder of their isolation. Some went mad, others simply withered away, their spirits broken by the endless monotony. From France's island fortress to the heart of ancient Rome, where cruelty was an art form. Long before Alcatraz or even the Bastille, there was the Mamertine prison, a place so infamous even the Romans were terrified of it. This wasn't just any jail, oh no, this was a dungeon dug deep underground, 2 levels of dark, damp cells that reeked of death and despair. Prisoners were literally lowered down into the bottom level through a hole in the ceiling, like human sacrifices to some cruel god. And the prisoners weren't petty thieves or drunks. We're talking kings and warriors who dared to defy Rome. They were left to rot in those cells with no hope of escape. Some starved, some died of disease, and others met an even worse fate: execution. The Mamertine was more than just a prison, it was a statement. Mess with Rome, and this is what happens to you. Now let's cross the Channel to England, where the Tower of London casts a long, dark shadow over history. Built by William the Conqueror as a show of might, this castle-turned-prison became a playground for the powerful. Kings and queens, princes and princesses. If you cross them, you might find yourself locked in one of its many towers. And trust me, this wasn't some comfy weekend retreat. The Bloody Tower, the White Tower, names that whisper of torture, executions, and secrets buried deep within the stone walls. Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII's unfortunate wife, lost her head there. Guy Fawkes, the gunpowder plot guy, was stretched on the rack until he confessed. Even famous writers like Thomas More ended up imprisoned there, facing a grim fate. The Tower of London was where the powerful demonstrated their power, often in the most brutal ways imaginable. Public executions were a spectacle, meant to scare the people into obedience. The Tower of London might have been a symbol of royal power and terror, but the horrors of imprisonment aren't limited to medieval times. During the Vietnam War, American soldiers captured by the North Vietnamese faced their own nightmare. Hoa Lo Prison, sarcastically nicknamed the Hanoi Hilton. Forget 5-star accommodations. This was a place of torture and deprivation. Cells were packed with prisoners, disease ran rampant, and the guards seemed to relish in inflicting both physical and mental pain. Solitary confinement, beatings, starvation, it was a living hell. Yet even in those dire circumstances, the American POWs found ways to resist. They formed secret communication networks, shared stolen scraps of food, and held on to their dignity in the face of unimaginable cruelty. Some of these prisoners, like Senator John McCain and Admiral James Stockdale, would go on to become heroes, their resilience inspiring generations. Polo Prison is now a museum, but its dark legacy remains. The horrors of war can leave scars on the land, but sometimes the worst wounds are inflicted on people by their own leaders. In Cambodia, during the reign of the Khmer Rouge, a high school was transformed into a nightmare. Tuol Sleng, also known as S21, became a symbol of terror. Forget about reforming criminals. This wasn't a prison, it was a slaughterhouse. Over 17,000 people were dragged through its gates, accused of everything from spying to simply being educated. Torture was routine. Confessions extracted through pain and fear. The Khmer Rouge even took pictures of their victims, a twisted record of their crimes. Few survived to tell the tale. Today, Tuol Sleng is a museum, a haunting reminder of the Cambodian genocide. It's not just the bloodstains on the walls or the instruments of torture that make it chilling. It's the knowledge that this horror was inflicted by fellow Cambodians, neighbors turned executioners. Tuol Sleng is a monument to the darkest depths of human cruelty, a place that forces us to confront the monsters lurking not just in the shadows, but within ourselves. The bars may have rusted and the walls may have crumbled, but the echoes of these prisons' cruelty still linger. They're a stark reminder that freedom is precious, and humanity's capacity for evil knows no bounds. Remember these stories, not just as historical facts, but as warnings and a tribute to those who endured the unimaginable.